Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right, let's begin with Surah Al-Fatiha, and then we'll commence with the lecture, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. All right, inshallah, today we're going to talk about one of the most important people in history and one of the people that is important in this month particular in a tangential way. Inshallah, we're going to talk about Maryam, Mary. Mentioned in the Quran, Mary alayhi salam, Maryam in English, in Arabic, Miriam in Hebrew, Maria in Spanish and Russian and Italian and other languages. My intention, inshallah, is first to give you a broad outline of Mary's life. And I'll try to say Mary or Miriam, but I'll probably say Mary more often because it's just more common in English. This month is a very interesting month in that the three major monotheistic religions are all celebrating or observing very important religious events. In Judaism, it is Passover, which is when, now, it may or may not jive with Islam. It's not in the Quran, so we can't say for certain that it happened. But mashallah, we'll say that at least in the Old Testament, the story of the angels and the last punishment that Allah gave to Pharaoh and his people, when the angels came and killed the firstborn for those who didn't have the mark on the door, that was the Passover. Christianity, we just passed Good Friday yesterday, and we have Easter Sunday coming tomorrow, actually. And this is, of course, we don't believe in the actual events that happened, where Isa alayhi salam was crucified and then came back to life. We don't believe in those things, but for the Christians, it is a very important holiday for them. In fact, I think it probably is the most important holiday. It's the center of their faith. And for Muslims, of course, we have Ramadan throughout most of this month, which started roughly around the beginning of the month of April and is going to end roughly around the beginning of May. So this whole month of April almost fits squarely into the month of Ramadan. And so my intention, inshallah, is to hopefully discuss the way Mary is perceived in all three of these faiths, and then we're going to get into the story of Mary as it's mentioned in the Quran. Now, in the Quran, I'll get more depth about what's happening in the Quran. You have the verses that discuss the story of Mary right over here. If you have an English Quran with you, if you have a Quran app, feel free to open it up and follow along as much as you want. I may ask you to read some verses, but it's going to be kind of hard because of a live stream, so I might not. But at least you can follow along with these verses. These verses in order, as far as I could tell the story of Mary alayhi salam going in order in the Quran. All right, so with that, we will begin our discussion about Mary, Maryam alayhi salam. Now we have different perspectives about Mary across the three different major monotheistic religions. Mostly, of course, talking about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We'll start with Christianity because it has perhaps the broadest range of beliefs. Within Christianity, there are three major groups within Christianity, not just in the United States. Throughout the world, there are three major groups of Christians: Catholics, Orthodox, and Protestants. In the United States, it's mostly Protestants, followed by Catholics. But throughout the world, Orthodox Christians make up a large portion of the Christian world. Now, as far as probably should start with, okay, I'm going to go back and start with Judaism, actually, because their belief about Mary is very simple. I'll come to Christians next. We'll start with Judaism, actually. Now, according to general Jewish beliefs, Isa, which is the Arabic word for Jesus, and Maryam, alayhimus salam, were not special. There's nothing against them. We're not saying anything wrong against them. It's just from their perspective of belief, those two individuals were not special. For Christians and Muslims, they both were special, but for people who follow Judaism, they're not really that special. Jews do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and they don't believe in his miraculous birth. So much of what we have from the Jewish perspective regarding Mary and Isa alayhi salam mostly comes from the Talmud. Not from, generally speaking, Jews do not accept the New Testament. And the Old Testament doesn't have anything unless you want to really look deep into and try to interpret certain verses to mean certain things. However, most of what we have from the Jewish perspective regarding Isa and his mother Miriam is coming from the Talmud. The Talmud is similar to the tafsir in Islam. The Talmud explains the Torah. However, from a Jewish perspective, the Talmud is held in higher reverence than we hold tafsir. When we look at tafsir, we see tafsir of the Quran as a scholar's opinion. You have Imam Muhammad did his tafsir of the Quran. You have Imam Tabari. You have Ibn Kathir. You have many Jalalain. You have many different mufassirun throughout Islam who have done tafsirs, and you can mix and match them. You can take some from one and discard others. A tafsir in Islam is not held as something religious. It is like it is a book that helps you understand what is really important. The Quran, that's what it's for. But the Talmud, from the Jewish perspective, is much more important. It is very important to them, as it explains the Torah. It began to be compiled about 200 years after Jesus' time on earth. And there's no secret of Talmud. Jews don't try to hide it, try to say that it's not man-made. They understand it is a man-made, handwritten document, but it has been constantly amended and changed many times. It's not something that they're trying to hide. It's just the way it is. But it's written by their religious scholars, and so from their perspective, it is very important. Now, in my time as listening and reading things from Muslims, and there is a verse in the Quran that alludes to it as well. Many Muslims have said that the Talmud has something negative to say about Mary and Isa alayhi salam. Now, as I mentioned, the Talmud is constantly being updated and changed, and there was a time, I don't know if it is in there currently, but it's probably been modified or altered to bring it down a little bit. There were passages in the Talmud that could be taken as insulting to Mary and Jesus alayhi salam, but many of them have been removed over time. But there was a particular passage in the Talmud, or a story in the Talmud, that mentions a person named Mary who was married but had an affair with a Roman soldier stationed in Palestine at the time. So it doesn't necessarily specifically claim that it was the Mary of the Quran and the Bible, but the indication is pretty clear. Now, the Quran also alludes to this as well. I didn't write on the board, but it is in chapter 4, verse 155 through 156. I will just do the English. Okay. They were condemned for breaking their covenant, rejecting Allah's signs, killing the prophets unjustly, and for saying, "Our hearts are unreceptive." It is Allah who has sealed their hearts for their disbelief, so they do not believe except for a few, and for their denial and outrageous accusation against Mary. So this is an allusion, and most scholars that I've read say that this is indicating those verses or passages in the Talmud that mention this person named Mary, who was supposedly married and had an affair with a Roman soldier stationed in Jerusalem, or at least in Palestine at the time. Might not have been Jerusalem. The Quran verse is chapter 4, verses 155 to 156. Surah An-Nisa, 155 to 156. Now, from a Jewish perspective, Mary, as I mentioned, is really not that special to them. From their perspective, if she did exist, then her life has either been fictionalized, or she was raped and made up the story of the miraculous birth, or she committed adultery and made up the story of the miraculous birth. I'm not certain today if the Talmud, however, includes those passages that mention that person named Mary. So that's generally the Jewish perspective of Mary. They don't really see her as anything special. It's nothing, just the way their belief is. Nothing against them, just the way it is. On to Christianity. Christianity, we have something different now. But we're going to start with the Protestants. I put COP, Catholics, Orthodox, and Protestants. I'm going to start with the Protestants, actually. The Protestants, which is what most of America is. Most of the United States is Protestant. Baptists, Methodists, Anglican are Protestants technically, but they're very close to Catholics, actually. But whatever, denomination, most Americans are Protestants. Protestants generally do not worship Mary, and they do not venerate her. The Protestant view of Mary is actually pretty similar to the Muslim view of Mary. They have high respect for Mary, but she is not divine. She's not a divine creature, divine being. There are very few, I'm not sure of any, there are very few, if any, Protestant holidays celebrating the life of Mary. And Protestants generally, especially those in the United States, generally reject worshiping Mary or seeking her intercession. And by the way, even though I'm lecturing, you do have freedom to just raise your hand if you have a question to ask. By all means, just raise your hand and I'll call out if you have any questions. It's not really, I don't want to be too so formal in here. Sure. Mm. Mm. Okay, if I understand your question, you're asking why are Jews considered people of the book if they don't reject Mary? Christians reject Muhammad, and they're still people of the book. People of the book mean they follow, even if it has been corrupted, or even if it's not the same, even if it's not authentic any longer, they still follow a scripture and a prophet that Allah has sent. So Jewish people, if they're religious, they still follow Abraham and the Mosaic law. And Christians still follow the Jesus, alayhi salam. And Muslims, of course, we follow Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they're still considered people of the book because they still follow a prophet and a scripture that Allah has revealed. Even though Jews also reject Muhammad, which is actually worse than rejecting Isa. So they're still considered people of the book, though. All right, so that's we discussed Protestants. Now on to the Orthodox Christians. Orthodox Christians generally, we don't have too many in the United States. They do have Orthodox communities. I've seen at least 2 Orthodox churches here in Atlanta. There are probably many, many more. But Orthodox Christians generally, without getting the history, there's a split between the Orthodox and the Catholics. Orthodox set their base in Constantinople. Catholics kept their base in Rome. Be that as it may, Orthodox Christians generally exist in places like Russia, Serbia, the Balkans. Even though they're not the same, Coptic Christians of Egypt and Ethiopia are somewhat related to Orthodox Christians, or they're not exactly Orthodox, but they're somewhat related along the same lines. So Orthodox Christians, their veneration of Mary comes very close to worship, whereas Protestants generally reject all worship of Mary. Orthodox Christians come very, very close to worshiping Mary from a Muslim perspective. They may say otherwise, but from a Muslim perspective, it is very close to worshiping Mary. They consider her the mother of God. They believe Mary to be above all creatures, including angels, not above Allah, not above God himself, but above all other creatures, including angels. Nonetheless, they still say that she is not divine. Along with their high reverence for Mary, there are many songs, works of art, poetry, prayers, many things throughout the Orthodox faith, venerating, respecting, honoring Mary. Orthodox Christians, of course, say that they do not worship her. What they consider worship might be different from what we consider worship. If we were to do these things to a person, it would be almost, if Muslims can do these things to a person, it would probably be considered worship from a Muslim perspective. But be that as it may, We'll give them the benefit of the doubt for now. They say that they do not worship Mary. They do give her a title, though, Theotokos, which is basically the mother of God. That's pretty much what it means. Now on to Catholics. Catholics are also very similar to Orthodox. As far as their relationship and reverence for Mary is very similar to Orthodox. They perhaps come even closer to worshiping Mary than even Orthodox Christians do. Catholics study Mary's life the way we study Prophet Muhammad's life. The way you have so many books written of the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and all, siras, and you have so many studies going deep into the Prophet's life, into his children's life, into his children's life, and how his life impacted the world. They go even deeper than that. They go very deep into Mary's life and practically make it a science. They have made the study of Mary's life and Mary herself as a science that is continuously being developed. Catholic religion is continuously developing Mary's life. You have modern Catholic scholars and popes and bishops, even today, still writing articles, essays, theses on the life and the personage of Mary. Catholic Church has, of course, commissioned hundreds of pieces of art commemorating Mary and portraying Mary. They believe that Mary died as a virgin and that she was always a virgin. There's never a point in time of her life when she was not a virgin. They believe that Mary conceived herself without sin. And they also say that they do not worship Mary. Leave that as it is. All right, so now we've gone through the two other monotheistic faiths, Judaism and the three main branches of Christianity. Now I get to the one that we're all pretty much familiar with, Islam. I don't have to tell you how Islam views Mary. I'm not going to go through that. I'm just going to discuss Mary's life as far as we have it in the Quran and a little bit outside of that as well. Now Mary's name is mentioned several times throughout the Quran, a whole bunch of times. But usually it's in connection with Jesus, because usually it's mentioned Isa ibn Maryam, Isa, or Jesus, the son of Mary. But Allah does give us extensive details about Mary's life in primarily two surahs. Chapter 3, Surah Ali Imran, and chapter 19, the surah that's named after Mary, Surah Maryam. And I've lined up the verses here in order, not in the order that they are in the Quran, but in the order of her life events, because some things Allah mentions secondly before they actually happen, or out of sequence as far as the time sequence is concerned. Allah has His reasons for doing that. Of course, the way Allah did it is the best way. I'm putting it this way simply for storytelling purposes, to make it easy to tell the story. Now, with these two chapters of the Quran, these two surahs of the Quran, Ali Imran and Maryam. Ali Imran mostly focuses on her early life, a period of time before she was born, up until the angel visited her and told her that she's about to have a miraculous birth. That's kind of where Ali Imran drops off. And then the story is picked up again in Surah Maryam, and Maryam continues the story of Mary, talking about her conception of Isa alayhi salam, and the birth and the miracles and the aftermath when she brought her baby Isa alayhi salam to her family, and what the people said to her after that. So those are the two chapters of the Quran that discuss Mary's life, and they're broken up into those two parts. Firstly, her early life, and then her life up until just a little bit after the birth of Isa alayhi salam. Now, regarding Mary's early life, there's very, very little in the Bible. So everything we know about Mary, other than secular scholars perhaps doing extensive research or maybe coming up with archaeological studies and stuff like that, we know very little about Mary's early life except for what is in the Quran. The Quran is the only scripture that really goes into detail about Mary's early life. And it begins with that first verse, and I didn't put it up there, 335. Verse 335. And in this verse, this is where Mary's mother promised to devote her unborn child to Allah's service. I really wish you guys could read this because I like a breath to take every now and then. But if not, if you do have your English Qur'ans or a Qur'an app, I do strongly encourage you to follow along so you can keep up with it and you can see what we're talking about, inshallah. All right, chapter 3, verse 35, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is quoting the wife of Imran. We're just going to do English. I'm not going to really work on the Arabic for now. Remember when the wife of Imran said, "My Lord, indeed I have pledged to you what is in my womb, consecrated for your service. So accept this from me. Indeed, you are the hearing, the knowing." Now, Mary's parents are not mentioned in the Bible. There is nothing in the Bible saying who Mary's parents are. However, there are apocryphal texts or apocryphal gospels. Those are gospels that are not considered canon, part of the Bible, that do mention them. And their names are given as the father is Joachim and the mother is Anne. That's why I put the mother Anne right there. In Islam, however, her father's name is Imran, which is what the surah is called, Ali Imran, the family of Imran. So here Allah is saying how the wife of Imran, that is Anne, and the Arabic word for Anne, I believe, is Hannah, because Anne actually comes from the Hebrew word Hannah, and the Arabic is Hannah. But we'll just say Anne. I'm trying to keep it simple here. So the wife of Anne asked Allah, she's already pregnant, and she promises that she will devote her child, and she's expecting it to be a son. She is going to devote her child to the service and worship of Allah. And then on to 36, she gets a surprise. Guys, might read for me. So if anybody wants to read, by all means, read chapter 3, 36. Anyone? If not, I'll read it. But
when she delivered
thank you.
her, she said, "My Lord, I have delivered a female," and Allah was most knowing of what she delivered. And the male is not like the female. And I have named her Mary, and I seek refuge for her in you and for her descendants from Shaitan.
Okay.
He expelled from the mercy of Allah.
Alhamdulillah. So Anne is surprised by the fact that she gave birth to a girl because she actually expected to have a boy because she wanted to have her boy in the service of Allah. But instead she got a girl. But she still is intent and determined to keep her promise. She made a promise to Allah. She didn't say, "If you give me a boy, I'll do this." She said, "Whatever's in my womb, we're going to do this." And so she got the girl, and she had to keep her promise to Allah, and she went along with it. And most likely, Mary, though it's not 100% sure, most likely Mary was born in the city of Nazareth in Palestine. Yes, sister.
The definition of Mary.
That would be a good thing to look up.
I don't
Mhm.
well, I Mary another way. So
Oh, no.
of course look into Mary in the Lord. But it means made servant of Allah in Hebrew.
Oh, alhamdulillah, that's good. So the sister was just telling us the origin of Mary's name, the translation of her name, and Mary does come, or I guess it would be Miriam, is actually a Hebrew word. It's not an Arabic word. For instance, Muhammad is Arabic, but the prophets and the people of the Old and even the New Testament that we take their names, they've been converted to Arabic names, Arabic words, but they are originally usually Hebrew words. So Mary or Miriam, even Jesus, that's a longer story though. Abraham, Moses, these are all originally Hebrew words. We have our Arabic counterparts for them now. So she's just saying that in Hebrew, the original meaning of Miriam was the maid servant of Allah. Okay, alhamdulillah. I should look it up myself, but alhamdulillah, thank you for the knowledge, sister. Okay. All right, we're going to skip on down a few verses we're going to skip down because we're going to skip on down. Because the next verse in the sequence of the story is chapter 3, verse 44. You're going to skip down a little bit. This is where the rabbis or the scholars of that time are casting lots or casting pins to see who would teach Mary. They knew that this was going to be a special person. And they all competed and discussed with each other who was going to have the right to teach Mary, because they knew that the mother that Anne has decided that Mary's going to be devoted to Allah, and Imran and Anne were known to be a righteous people, and these rabbis everyone wanted the honor of being Mary's teacher. All right, on chapter 3, verse 44. If anyone wants to read it, by all means, go ahead and start. If not, I'll have to pull up my app because.
This is part of the tidings of the things unseen, which we reveal unto thee, O Messenger, by inspiration. Thou wast not with them when they cast lots with Aaron, as to which of them should be charged with the care of Mary, nor wast thou with them when they disputed the time.
Okay, so you can imagine a bunch of old men in the masjid, or it would have been a synagogue or a temple at that time, arguing about who's going to have the right to teach this young girl. Everybody wanted to teach her. Ultimately, whether casting arrows or casting pins, Zechariah won the competition. Zechariah is a prophet in Islam. Zechariah won the competition, and in this case, the Bible and the Quran are in complete agreement. Both books agree that Zechariah was Mary's religious teacher. You have Zechariah, we have his name up here. Zechariah, or I guess English word is Zachary, his wife was a woman named Elizabeth. This is in Luke chapter 1, I believe. I don't know the exact verse, but it's in Luke 1 where they mention that Zechariah was married to Elizabeth. Zechariah's wife was Elizabeth, who was also, by the way, the sister of Anne. So they were related. Anne and cousin?
I thought all of them were in the same family. So
Yeah, they are in the same family. Yeah, I believe these two were sisters. I'll look it up again and make sure. But I believe they were sisters, actually. Allah knows best. But regardless, they were related. And Elizabeth was therefore Mary's aunt. Now, all of them are from the Hebrew priestly class that descended from Aaron, or Prophet Harun, alayhi salam. In the even in the Quran, though the Quran doesn't specify the priest part, but in the Old Testament, Moses was the general, and Aaron was the religious leader. Aaron was the priest in the Old Testament. And you kind of have it in Islam. It talks about how Moses pretty much used Aaron as his intermediary with talking to Pharaoh and helping him with more of the verbal arguments against Pharaoh. But the Quran doesn't really delve into it. But from Aaron came a whole priestly class, from his lineage came a whole priestly class that has remained in the Hebrew world, I think up until the diaspora, when the Romans forced them out of Palestine, out of Jerusalem. But nonetheless, they're both from this priestly class. And in fact, in the Bible, Elizabeth is called a daughter of Aaron, even though obviously she was not a biological daughter of Aaron. This is considered a title for women amongst the priestly class, especially those who are high-ranking or very religious. All right, moving back up to same chapter, but now verse 37. Chapter 3, verse 37, Allah then goes on to bless Mary with miraculous provision. So, Mary has entered her tutelage under Zechariah. Zechariah is teaching her, and he would leave her for a time period and come back, and she would have all this food, fruits that were, according to some tafsir, fruits that are out of season. She had things that he didn't expect her to have when he had left her alone to study in the temple. And here she is with all these provisions. So if anyone wants to read chapter 3, verse 37, by all means, please do so. It's a pretty long one.
So her Lord accepted her with good acceptance and caused her to grow in a good manner and put her in the care of Zechariah. Every time Zechariah entered upon her in the prayer chamber, he found with O Mary, from where is this coming to you? She said, it is from Allah. Indeed, Allah provides the things He wills without account.
Okay, so this is where Allah is blessing Mary with miraculous provisions, and Zechariah he knew it already, but now he is surprised coming in to see Mary with these fruits and food that he didn't expect her to have. Oh. Mm-hmm.
Just in, you think about, like, for most of us, who, you see how Zechariah is a very religious man, being because if you saw your wife with a bunch of different, or somebody with a bunch of different fruits, and just, I'm like, where are you getting this money from? This Louis Vuitton, whatever.
Okay. That's fine.
I'm just saying, just to put it into perspective.
All right, so now after spending all this time with Mary, Zechariah, who was an older man himself, as well as his wife, he starts longing for a child himself. And it's natural. I've got 5 kids, and even every now and then I see someone with a young baby, I think about how it was when my kids were young, before they got, smart mouth and everything, before they got intolerable. But I see someone with a young baby and a young child in that period of time, from about 1 to about 7, maybe 10, when they're just adorable and they're cute and they're learning about the world, and it comes up to me, maybe I could have a 6th one. My wife shuts it down real quick, but I think maybe I could have a 6th one. So Zechariah, he's in a worse situation because he and his wife are physically beyond the age of having children. And he didn't have any children. So it's even more, I have a little longing that quickly gets dispelled after a few minutes. But him, you can imagine that he would probably really want a child, especially seeing this young girl learning so much, and she's blessed by Allah. She comes from this righteous family. He's probably thinking, I would really want to have one of my own and have something similar. But he knows that he and his wife are beyond the age of devotion. This brings us to chapter 38 of verse 3. Verse 38 of chapter 3. I'll go ahead and read that one, inshallah. And at that, Zechariah called upon his Lord, saying, My Lord, grant me from yourself a good offspring. Indeed, you are the hearer of supplication. Now, we're not going to deep dive into Yahya, who wound up being the result of that prayer. But you know the story. Even though he knew that it was physically and biologically impossible for him to have he and his wife to have children at their age, he still asked Allah for it. And there's a whole bunch of lessons in that right there that we can all just take upon. Even if you think that something is impossible, even if every scientist, doctor, textbook, everyone is telling you it is impossible for this to happen, Allah can make it happen if you pray for it. And if Allah wills for it to happen, it may happen. He prayed for it. Allah told him he's going to do it. And the funny thing is, though, after seeing the miracles from Mary, after going through all these things that happened, even though he knows that he's the prophet of Allah, when the angel comes to visit him and says, you're going to have a child, he still says, you sure about that? My wife is too old. How are you going to have a child? Even with all that, which is another lesson there, that sometimes, now of course he's a prophet, way above us, but still, it's lets you know that even with, sometimes even hard for us to understand the miraculous things that Allah can bring forth. But his prayers were answered in the next verse, and then for a while the Quran talks about how Yahya, who was over here, how Yahya was conceived, how it came to be, and the sign that Allah gave to Zechariah and his wife and all. But we're not going to do that because we're trying to stay focused on Mary. But of course, by all means, this is the month of the Quran. By all means, go back and read it and study it, inshallah. And so now we got at least 2 miracles being spoken of, but there are probably many, many more. Mary getting the food, now Zechariah getting getting a child when it was, biologically and scientifically impossible for him to have one. Now we get to same chapter, chapter 3, verse 42. This is when we're starting to get to the big miracle. Verse 42 through 43, Allah sends an angel to Mary. If anyone wants to read this one, please do. Okay.
Behold, the angel said, O Mary, Allah has chosen thee and purified thee, chosen thee above the women of all nations. O Mary, worship thy Lord devoutly. Prostrate thyself and bow down in prayer with those who bow down.
Now Mary was already a devout person. She was a student of knowledge. She had spent her young childhood, and she was still very young. I'll get to her, what was her likely age at this time. She was still very young, but she had spent her whole childhood being raised by a prophet and being taught by a prophet. So she knows about worship, but Allah is telling her to increase her worship. This was a preparation. And we all, every Shaban, every month, every year when Shaban comes around, people start saying, start getting prepared for Ramadan, start getting ready for Ramadan, it's coming, preparing us for this miraculous month that is coming upon us. When people get ready to make Hajj, they start preparing usually months in advance. Not just to start about taking time off from work and putting money aside and making sure you're willing, not just that, but also spiritually getting prepared for this miraculous journey. And so here is Allah preparing Mary, telling Mary to prepare herself spiritually for what is about to come. This was preparation for the miraculous birth of Isa alayhi salam. And what did she do? She secluded herself. She went away from the general population and secluded herself. And I'm not exactly sure where she secluded herself, but I believe it's probably within the temple. She secluded herself from everyone else to focus on Allah's worship. Just like in the last 10 nights of Ramadan, it's all coming together. I'm making it come together somehow or another. In the last nights of Ramadan, we are encouraged, it's not mandatory, we are encouraged to seclude ourselves in the masjid for itikaf. Spend time worshiping Allah in itikaf. And if you've ever done itikaf for full 10 nights, I've only done it once, and I was very, very young. It gets very difficult to do that after a certain time with wife and kids and children and work and all that kind of stuff. But I was able to do it before I had any of those things when I was young. It's an amazing thing. It's different. It's an amazing form of worship. If you haven't done it, I would encourage you to try to do the full 10 days, secluding yourself in the masjid, or I would say sequestering yourself. You don't have to secluding yourself. Sequestering yourself in the masjid and spending time just 10 days straight, just worshiping Allah. It's an amazing thing. But now Mary has to do the same thing, a similar thing at least. And she has to seclude herself away from, or divide herself away from other people and focus on worshiping Allah. And while she is in seclusion, and by the way, the verse that talks about that seclusion, is what I need people to read for me, is actually happening in chapter 19, verse 16, because I have to now flip over between apps. So if you can get to chapter 19, verse 16 before I do, please go ahead and start reading. Okay, so she withdrew from everyone else, secluded herself, and then began her worship of Allah. She still has not been told what the purpose of all this is yet. She just withdrew herself and began to prepare for I don't know if she knew what was happening. Obviously she didn't know because the angel hasn't come to her yet. So she secluded herself even before this in preparation. Now back to chapter 3. Sometimes these two chapters overlap as far as the story is concerned, but especially at this point in time, as the story in chapter 3 is ending and the story in chapter 19 is picking up, you start to get a little bit of overlap as it goes back and forth between 3 and 19, but eventually it sticks with 19. In chapter 3, verse 45, this is when the major event happens, and the angel comes to visit Mary. All right, if anyone wants to read chapter 3, verse 45. Okay, so this is the big event where Allah is telling Mary that she's about to have a miraculous birth and give birth to a prophet, give birth to the Messiah, give birth to the Christ, Now, our interpretation of the crisis might be different from the Christian interpretation, but she is being informed that she's about to experience a miracle. Now, most likely, and there is no way to confirm this, but most likely, Mary's age at this time was between the ages of 12 and 15. It may sound odd, but most people back then were married. Most women, I should say, men were a little bit older. Most women back then, we're talking about over 2,000 years ago, were married between the ages of 13 and 16. So if Mary was still a virgin, most likely she would have been somewhere between the age of 12 and 15. Of course, Allah knows best. There's no way to really know. But I'll put it like this, particularly for royalty, even 200, 300 years ago, queens and princesses were getting married at 16 years old. Queen Anne of Scots was married at like 16. Empress Catherine of Russia was married at 16 years of age. So this is like, less than 300 years ago, maybe 500 years ago for Mary Queen of Scots. So it's not unheard of for women to be married at a young age back then. So Mary is visited by this angel, and the angel gives her this news. At first, she thinks that this angel is a man. The angel's giving her this knowledge, this information, and at first she thinks there's a man coming in here to talk to her. And she's secluded herself from everybody else. As she mentioned, she secluded herself from everyone else. And now, and the angels, as far as I'm aware of, the angels only come to mankind when they do come in the forms of men. It's only been, throughout the Quran, every time the angels have come to any prophet, has been in the form of a man, a male. And so Mary sees this creature that resembles a male, and so she asks Allah for protection. That comes in chapter 19, verse 18. And flip over. If anyone can get to it before I do, please do. I am all over. And so Mary's seeking refuge in Allah, asking Allah for protection from this man who barged in on her, from her perspective, while she is in seclusion and worshiping Allah. The angel confirms that he is a messenger of Allah, and by messenger we mean an angelic messenger, not a prophet/messenger. He's a messenger from Allah, meaning a message for her. He gives her the news, and then she begins to question as well, just like Zachariah, just like her teacher questioned, like, how is that possible? How can that really happen? Mary says the same thing. Chapter 3, verse 47, Mary says the same thing, or a similar thing. How can this happen? If anyone wants to read chapter 3, verse 47, please.
He said, "O my Lord, how shall I have a son when no man hath touched me?" He said, "Even so, Allah createth what he will. When he hath decreed a plan, he but saith to its deed and result."
Once again, regardless of what the doctors say or the scientists say, when Allah has decreed something, when he says kun, fayakun. When he says kun, be, fayakun, it is. Kun, fayakun, be, and it is. When Allah says something and decrees something, it is bound to happen. It will happen. And so despite this being completely against science and technology, and what we understand of it at least, Allah blessed Mary with a child as a virgin. And so now chapter 3 pretty much ends as far as the story of Mary is concerned, and chapter 19 picks up the remainder of the story. In chapter 19, flip over myself, verse 22 through 23, that discusses Mary's difficulty with the child and her difficulties through the labor pains, and ultimately having the child. And I'll read chapter 19, verse 22. So she conceived him, and she withdrew him. So she conceived him, and she withdrew with him to a remote place. And the pains of childbirth drove her to the trunk of a palm tree. She said, "Oh, I wish I had died before this and was in oblivion, forgotten." So Mary is going into labor now. The miraculous don't want to use the Christian word for it. The immaculate conception. Conception. But the miraculous conception, I can say that. The miraculous conception that Mary had has happened, and now she is large with child, and she's going through the labor pains as her child is about to come out. And she's concerned about many things. First of all, she's going through some pain. As I mentioned, I've seen all 5 of my kids being born, and it is, from a father's perspective, it's wonderful. It's a beautiful thing. I don't know if it's the same thing from a mother's perspective. It's a completely different perspective. And being a father generally is fun. They kind of take it for granted. But still, being a father is fun because, at least for me, I don't really deal with all of the dirty stuff. I'm the one who gives them candy. I don't have to worry about them getting, all the other stuff. But that's neither here nor there. So now Mary is concerned now. She is going through this severe pain of childbirth, and in the back of her mind, she may also be thinking about what is going to happen when people find out. What's going to happen when people find out that I've given birth to a child and I'm not married? They're going to think so many things about this, and I have no way of explaining this. Sure.
I know the Bible talk about Joseph's children.
Mm-hmm.
So does the Quran mention Joseph's children?
That's coming up next. Well, basically she's asking about, and according to the Bible, the New Testament, not the Old Testament, Mary had a husband named Joseph. And it's not mentioned in the Quran. Maybe it's true, Allah knows best if it's true, but the Quran does not mention anything about Joseph. I guess explain that. Her husband Joseph, not the prophet Yusuf, doesn't mention anything about him, and I don't know of any hadith that mentions him either. I don't know every single hadith. I'm not aware of any hadith that mentions him. But be that as it may, Allah knows best if he really existed, or if it was just something that appeared in the Bible after some time. But I'm going to talk about the differences between the Islamic perception, the Islamic view of Isa alayhi salam's birth, and the Christian view, because Joseph does play into that from the Christian perspective. Okay, I'm going into it right now. So, we have here in the Quran where Mary has, now if Allah told her to go to the trunk of a palm tree, she must be outside. Palm trees don't grow inside. And she must also most certainly be in a desert, or at least in this place with very little water, because later on, Allah is going to give her more sustenance, which includes water. We're going to talk about that in a moment. So she's obviously secluded, outside, away from society, away from main society, on her own pretty much, all by herself, about to give birth to a child in this miraculous birth. That is the Quran's perspective. The Bible version is different. And the Bible version says that she was engaged to a man named Joseph. And Mary went into labor with Isa alayhi salam while traveling in Bethlehem. Now, there's an obvious thing that if they're unmarried while they're traveling together. That would have been strange even back then, but we're not going to really delve into that. Be that as it may, according to the Bible, Mary and Joseph were traveling through Bethlehem. When Mary went into labor, they went to stop at an inn where she can have birth, but there was no room. And so she wound up having to go into a barn to give birth. And she wound up when she did give birth, she wound up using a manger, which is, I guess, like a trough or something you can use to feed animals or hold animals, as Isa's cradle, as when he was first born. None of that is in the Quran. The Quran perspective is completely different. There's no inns, there's no barns and mangers and any of that. Maybe there is some way to tie them both together, but I'm not going to hurt my brain with that. I'll just stick with what the Quran says. Allah knows best how much of the Bible story is true. There may be some truth to it. Allah knows best. In any case, so that's the biblical perspective of Isa's birth. Now, back into the Quran perspective. Still in chapter 19, verse 24 and 26. Allah now provides Mary with sustenance to ease her pain. So I want to read 24 and 25. Chapter 19, 24 and 25.
And he called her your Lord has provided beneath you a stream, and shaped towards you the trunk of the palm tree. It will drop upon you ripe, fresh dates.
Okay, now this voice that called out to Mary, we are not certain if it was an angel or if it was Isa himself. Now, she still hasn't given birth yet, as far as we know. She still hasn't given birth yet, but we don't know. It just says a voice. Allah just says a voice. It doesn't say whose voice it was. So we have to just accept that it was a voice. Could it have been an angel? It could have been Isa alayhi salam. And in a few moments, I'll try to explain to you why it might have been Isa rather than an angel. But then Allah provides a stream. So this is further in evidence that she might have been in a desert area. And Allah allows a stream to flow from the desert. He allows her, he informs her to shake a tree. And palm trees are not small trees. They're pretty large. You can see them in Florida. They grow in Florida. You just can't shake a palm tree and have these things fall down. Even a grown man, full strength, will have a hard time shaking a palm tree and forcing fruits to fall down from it. But Allah allowed a teenage pregnant woman to shake a tree and for fruits to fall down. And this is a callback to what happened to Mary as a child when she was in the temple, and Allah brought sustenance to her miraculously as well. This is a callback to that one, a reminder to Mary and to us as well that Allah brought her sustenance as a child when she was alone in the temple and studying under the Prophet Zachariah alayhi salam, and also as an older, I won't say a child, but as a teenager, as a woman about to give birth, Allah still provides her sustenance even then. So Allah provides her sustenance, and she gives birth to Isa alayhi salam. And after that, in chapter 19, verse 26, Allah then instructs her to avoid contact with other people for a while. We can ponder upon this for a bit. I'm going to read this verse. In chapter 19, verse 26, Allah says, and what translates to, "So eat and drink and be contented. And if you see from among humanity anyone, say, indeed, I have vowed to the most merciful abstention, so I will not speak today to any man." So Allah instructs Mary to stay away from everyone else for a while. Spend some time with this miracle that she's just given birth to. She has the sustenance she needs. She's in the shade of the palm tree. She has fruit and water. All her child needs is his mother, so he's going to be all right. So she's there. This also reminds us of another miracle. It just came to me, actually. One that is directly connected to Islam and the Hajj. When Ibrahim's wife, Hajar, when she's in the valley of Baca, and she has her child, Ismail, who is also a baby and also a prophet, and also a miraculous birth. Not the same one. It wasn't the same exact miraculous birth, but it was a miraculous birth. And she is without water. And Hagar in English, Hajar has to look for water for her child. She needs water to take care of her child. She starts running back and forth looking for water, and Mecca is desolate. It is very desolate. It is absolutely a desert. She's running back and forth looking for water, looking for some sort of sustenance between these two hills, Safa and Marwa. And while she's running, looking for some sustenance for her and her child, an angel comes and the well of Zamzam comes forth. And from that well of Zamzam comes the water, perhaps water a few seeds that may have been left behind by birds. The seeds sprout into plants. The plants attract insects. The insects attract birds. Some Arab nomads are way off. They see birds flying around. They say, we've never seen birds in this part of Arabia before. They go there and see. They see Hajar and Ismail there, and that is the beginning of the city of Mecca that we have now. And so this is a similar miracle where Allah provides sustenance for his servants when they need it. So Mary has to spend some time in seclusion away from everyone. These first few, I don't know how long it is. Allah doesn't say in the Quran. I'm not sure of any hadith that confirm it. But she has to spend some time with her child for along the best, days, weeks, or months. But she's spending some time alone with her child for a while. But eventually, she has to go back to her family. She has to go back to her family with his child. And everybody knows that she wasn't married. and now she has to go and explain what's going on. That brings us to still chapter 19, verse 27. If anyone wants to read chapter 19, verse 27, please.
When she brought him to her own folks, carrying him, they said, O Mary, thou hast come with an amazing thing.
Okay, go on to read 28 also because they're connected.
O sister of Aaron, thy father was not a wicked man, nor was thy mother a harlot. Then she pointed to him. They said, how can we talk to one who is in the cradle, O young boy?
Okay, so Mary has to return to her family. She has this miracle, and she has to explain what's going on. She has to try to, at least. And they are, of course, like, Mary, Mahada, what is this? What's going on? You come from this good family. Your father is well known. I mean, this would translate perfectly into today's world, too. Don't you know who your father is? Brings such shame to your family. Your mother is well known. Your mother has always been chaste. Your father's been chaste. He's a highly respected man. He's a leader in our community. And you go out and do this? Mary, explain yourself. How is this happening? And Mary is, how can she say, oh, well, I went to seclusion. The angel came to me and said, I was going to give miraculous birth, and God give me days to strength. How can she say all that? She doesn't know what to say. And so this is where that voice that spoke to her earlier, why some people say, why some scholars say, why I'm more inclined to say that this is why they say that voice that spoke to her might have been Isa alayhi salam, and why the evidence kind of points towards him. Because she has nothing to do, she points to the child. He's told, well, explain yourself. He spoke before, talk now. She points to the child, and Isa alayhi salam has to talk. But before he even gets to talk, everyone who is around her, Mary, what are you talking about? The baby can't talk. The baby doesn't have teeth yet. How's the baby going to talk? How's the baby going to tell us what's happening? They're just completely dumbfounded by Mary's strange actions and everything that she's doing that is odd and not what they expect from someone who she came from a religious family. She was raised and taught by a prophet. She had miracles performed all around her. She has such great lineage, and now to see this, and then her best answer is to point to the child. All right, but still, that's where you get to verses chapter 19 and through 34, which pretty much end the story in the Quran. And Isa alayhi salam speaks, and I'll read this part here. Jesus said, "Indeed, I am the servant of Allah. He has given me the scripture and made me a prophet. And he has made me blessed wherever I am, and has enjoined upon me prayer and zakat as long as I remain alive, and made me dutiful to my mother, and he has not made me a wretched tyrant. And peace is on me the day I was born, and the day I will die, and the day I am raised alive." And then Allah finishes it up with this final verse. "That is Jesus, the son of Mary, the word of truth upon which they are in dispute." And then Allah goes on to talk about other things regarding the different religions and their perspective of Isa alayhi salam. But Isa vindicates his mother by speaking, which is another miracle. So we have a whole bunch of miracles happening in this story about Mary. So that pretty much ends the story. We can talk about Isa a little bit. I do want to talk about Isa's name, actually. Now, I'll talk about Isa's name in a moment, actually. I'll come to that in a moment. Because there are a couple of things we want to wrap up here before I open up for questions. Now, as I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, going back to the other faiths and regarding their beliefs about Mary, Catholics and Orthodox Christians do not believe Mary died. They believe that she became a spirit and ascended to heaven and that she's permanently in Allah's company. Protestants, however, believe that she died a normal death, but they don't really emphasize it because from the Protestant perspective, Mary does not hold that same level of reverence as with Catholics and Orthodox. Muslims probably should take the similar route to Protestants. I don't really want to say that, but in this case, their perspective is pretty much in line with Islam. Allah does not say how Mary died or when she died or anything like that, but by all accounts, she would have died a normal death and lived a normal life, as much as normal for a person who had a miraculous birth. But her life would have been most likely lived out normally and died a normal death. There's no other evidence in Islam otherwise. All right, so now we have this story about Mary, but it's not without its controversies. The primary one comes in the verse where Mary takes her son back to her people. She takes Isa alayhi salam back to her people, and they refer to her by the phrase sister of Aaron. Now, this is not the first time this came up. This came up in Prophet Muhammad's time as well. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually had the same question brought to him. I'll read the hadith. Mughira ibn Shu'bah reported, when I came to Najran, they, the Christians of Najran, asked me, you read, O sister of Aaron, in the Quran, whereas Moses was born much before Jesus. When I came back to Allah's Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I asked him about that, whereupon he said, the people of old used to give names to their persons after the names of apostles and pious persons who had gone before them. So this is not anything new, but people still, if you, back when I used to do these online debates with people, I don't bother stuff anymore, but many anti-Muslim activists or anti-Muslim apologists, depending on how they may be, they often bring up this verse of the Quran, trying to portray Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as not knowing what he was talking about, as getting Mary, the mother of Isa alayhi salam, mixed up with the biblical, the Old Testament Miriam. Aaron and Moses, according to the Old Testament, had a sister named Miriam. On top of that, according to the Old Testament as well, their father was named Amram, A-M-R-A-M, which sounds a lot like Imran. And so they accused the prophet of getting things mixed up. However, as I mentioned earlier, Luke chapter 1 clearly says Elizabeth was a daughter of Aaron. So this is proof of the prophet's statement that at that time, people used to give their highly respected members of their society, they used to name them after the prophets. Just like the Bible says that Elizabeth was a daughter of Aaron, the Quran says that Mary was a sister of Aaron. There really is no difference one way or the other. Even today, we have various orders, mostly in Catholicism. We have Catholic orders of the sisters of Joseph, and the sisters of Zachary, and the sisters of this, and sisters of that, and the brothers of this. It is a similar thing where people are naming their religious orders or religious people after certain messengers or religious people. Now, regarding the name of Amran and Imran, once again, the Bible does not say who was Mary's father or what was his name. There's no indication in the Bible. We only have it from the apocryphal gospels, those are not accepted as canon, and that name was listed as Joachim. Imran and Amran do sound alike. It is likely just a coincidence. This is not the first coincidence in the Quran. Also in the Old Testament, there's a story of, I believe it's Isaac. No, I think it's Jacob. Jacob had a brother named Esau. Sounds a lot like Isa, is the Arabic word for Jesus alayhi salam. And some of these same people who try to criticize Islam with that try to say that the prophet got Isa's name mixed up with Esau in the Bible, and it's completely bonkers. It's foolishness. Most Christian scholars would say that Jesus' original name was Joshua, or at Jesus' time, they weren't speaking pure Hebrew anymore. They're speaking Aramaic, which was an offshoot of Hebrew. His name was Yeshua, and that would have been translated into Yeshua. I have to write this down. I didn't mean to write, but I'm going to have to. Yep. Yeshua, which is the name for Joshua. When this turns into Greek, it became Ishu. And then became Yeshu actually, and then went on into Roman, and it became Isu. And from Isu, you get Isa. However, in English, many of these words, such as, for instance, Yahya means John in English. Y and J are often interchangeable. Same thing over here. We put a J where this Y should have been, and we got Jesus. So that's why Isa sounds so much different from Jesus. It's just the way the word has changed over the centuries. And at the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Arabs of his generation, when they were living, most likely used not Jesus but Isu, and the Arabic is just converting Arabic into Isa. So they are actually connected, and Allah knows best. All right, and okay, I think that's about all I have for today. No, last thing I want to talk about is just this family that Mary had. This is it's amazing that we have this family that has so many righteous people, so many prophets within it. We have Imran himself. Not sure if he's a prophet. I don't believe the Quran says he's a prophet. Allah knows best if he was. We have Imran. Then we have his brother-in-law, Zechariah. Then we have Zechariah's son, Yahya. And then we have Imran's grandson, Isa alayhi salam. Then we also have the women in that family. Anne, who is Mary's mother. We have Mary herself, and then Mary's aunt, Elizabeth. So we have at least 7 people, and there are actually maybe a few more, but it goes outside the Quran. If I go into the people that the Bible mentioned as well in that family. But just within the Quran, we have 7 people mentioned from this family, and we can see why Allah chose to name an entire surah after this family. Mary belonged to a righteous family. Is righteous father, mother, aunt, uncle, cousins, and her son and herself as well were all righteous and good people. And that will conclude my discussion, inshallah. I am willing to take questions, preferably keep it around this topic if you want to. Try not to go too far outside the topic if you can. Yes, sister. Okay, are you asking if all the prophets are considered part of the family? Now, okay, what the sister's asking is, are all the prophets considered part of the family of Imran? I'm going to say I don't know for certain. However, I have read things where it says that all the prophets are related in some way. It may take a few leaps, but honestly, I don't know. I have to check it out to be sure. I don't want to say something I don't know. So, if anyone has any insight on that, if all the prophets were part of that.
I've read something that said that in the Bible they do a lineage of Jesus, and it goes all the way back to Adam.
Mhm.
So I would guess that
Yeah.
there are.
But
that
and
else they work on
then
things.
another thing in retrospect of why we got language, that's why we use perception now.
Mhm.
Imam said every woman in the Bible represents some type of society.
Mm.
So you can get a message from it. Because if we look at this too literally, we're going to be messed up.
Mhm.
Period. So in essence, every woman that you have called a death is a type of society.
Mm.
Because it gave that in the Bible in Genesis, 5th chapter, 1st and 2nd verse. I created man in my own image and gave them their name, Adam.
Mhm.
So that gave you, Adam was not just an individual man, he was a people.
Thank you. Mhm. Mhm. I mean, it's part. Like I said, there are. I've seen family trees, similar to what Brother Anis mentioned, but even from a Muslim perspective, connecting all the prophets as related. And I mean, considering everybody kind of came from the same group of tribes back then, they probably were relation. Now, when it comes to the prophet was, of course, Arab, and his lineage comes from Abraham, alayhi salam. So that might be a bit more of a stretch, a bit more disconnected from than the Hebrew and biblical prophets, because most of the biblical prophets came from the same stock, the same origin of Jacob's 12 sons, I believe. So Jonah's 12 sons. No, Jacob. Jonah was well. Jacob's 12 sons. So it's likely that all of them were distantly related. Allah knows best, though. Anything else? Yes, brother.
You know how Miriam's name was servant of Allah? Was there any name?
Yeah, as I mentioned here, it was initially, according to, now remember, for all of the biblical prophets and figures, they've all come from, the Arabic names are just changes from the Hebrew or Aramaic original words. From a Christian scholars say that Jesus' real name was Joshua, and that would have been Yeshua in Aramaic. And Joshua, the Bible clearly says what Joshua was. It clearly says, I can't remember. The Bible clearly says what Joshua means, because Joshua is also, it's not the first Joshua in the Bible. First Joshua in the Bible was Moses' apprentice who took over the leadership of the people, of the children of Israel after Musa, after Moses died. That was the first and most famous Joshua before. Obviously, Jesus is the second one. But, yeah, it was his, as far as we know, Allah knows best, and just tracking down the name as it changed over the years, his name was most likely Joshua originally, or the Aramaic equivalent of what we now call Joshua. And Allah knows best, but most likely it was Joshua. Anything else? We're good here? Okay. All right, if there are no other questions or comments, inshallah, we could wrap this up. Yes.
I just Googled Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
It says God is deliverance.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, because it's mentioned in the Bible, and I completely forgot about it.
God is deliverance.
All right, we'll close it out with dua, inshallah. ربنا آتنا